All right, Yehuda, thank you. First of all, thank you to Rabbi Rand, who did a wonderful job covering Daf Yomi. It feels like it's been a while, right? Because it's since last Wednesday that I've been here, so all right. So it's good to be back. Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Moshe and Susie Feder. Lily Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's father. That was a good one. Simcha Aryeh ben Yosef's feet, whose yard site was on the 17th of Iyar. Okay. We are on the very top of Tes Zayin Amud Beis. Let's see if we can get ourselves back into this. Nitma ba'azara v'nelma mimena. So that tuma. So this is a quote from a Mishnah that let's say that somebody, we all know that if somebody becomes tameh, so then he can't eat kodshim, can't eat sacrificial meats. Also can't walk into the area of the Beis HaMikdash. Then our Mishnah says that if he becomes tameh while he is in the azara, so just standing around without leaving right away could also lead him to be chayev for being tameh in the area of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara wants to know, Tuma ba'azara minolan, what is the source for the idea? We understand if you were tameh first, then you walk into the Beis HaMikdash, we get that you brought Tuma into the Beis HaMikdash, we understand that that would be prohibited. What about, where is the source for the idea that I wasn't tameh, I was there legally, and then I become tameh, that I'm also going to be liable for being tameh and standing in the Beis HaMikdash. So Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Kosav Echad Omer, we have two psukim. One pasuk says, in Bamidbar Yud Tes, as Mishkan Hashem Timei, right? Person comes in contact with a mace and B'nefesh Adam, and he has contaminated the Mishkan of Hashem. Okay, that's what it says. Because of Echad Omer, another pasuk says, this was Bamidbar Yud Tes, about 7 psukim later, that says, Ki es mikdash Hashem timei. So he's going to get kares because he has profaned, he has contaminated the Beis HaMikdash of Hashem. So we'll say the parts in parentheses, whether or not they're necessary or not. Imeinu inyan letuma shebechutz, if you've already understood from one of the psukim would tell me that bringing tuma from the outside into the Beis HaMikdash is going to cause me to be liable. So then I don't need a second pasuk to say the exact same thing. So therefore, why do I have the second pasuk? Teniu inyan letuma shebifnim. So we have this concept of im eno inyan, that if I don't need it for the topic that it seems to be discussing in the context, you bring it to the next likely context, and the next likely circumstance would be somebody who is tameh in the Beis HaMikdash, becomes tameh in the Beis HaMikdash, should be liable under that circumstance. Okay. Now, in order for that to be the case, you need the psukim to be extra. So one pasuk, and then the second pasuk is extra. I don't need it. So the question that the Gemara asks is, V'kroi miyasri? Hi. So V'kroi miyasri, are you trying to tell me that those psukim are extra? V'ha mitzvah tzrichi. Those psukim are very necessary. There's no way that pasuk is extra. Why? Titanya, because we learn in a brisa. Rabbi Elazar Omer, not to get confused, because we've got Rabbi Elazar, right, who is Rabbi Elazar, who is a Amora, and we have Rabbi Elazar, who is a Tana. So you have Rabbi Elazar here, when we say it from a brisa, this is Rabbi Elazar the Tanya. They have the same name, but they lived several hundred years apart, making one during the times of the Mishnah, one during the times of the Gemara. This is Rabbi Elazar the Tana, and he says, Im nemar mishkan lama nemar mikdash. Im nemar mikdash lama nemar mishkan. In this context of impurity being in holy places, it calls the Beis HaMikdash the word mishkan, and then it calls it the word mikdash. And I need both of those cases. Why? Because the mishkan and the mikdash might not have the same laws. The mishkan tends to refer to the mishkan, which was the traveling Beis HaMikdash that they had in the desert, and the Mikdash would be the permanent Beis HaMikdash. So ilu nemar mishkan velo nemar mikdash. If the pasuk had told me that it would be in violation if I was in a circumstance of the mishkan, but it hadn't also given me a pasuk about the Beis HaMikdash, hayisi omer, I would have thought al mishkan yehei chayev, that you would only be liable for bringing tuma into the Mishkan, not the Mikdash. Why? Sheharei meshuach v'shemen hamishcha. Because, as we had learned a few days ago, when the Mishkan was created, it was the only item that was holy, that was sanctified through the anointing of the special oil that Moshe Rabbeinu had made. All of the other utensils, since were established as holy through usage in service. Right, so you have a bowl, then you want to consecrate it. You use it in the service of a korban. But in the original Mishkan, all of those utensils were sanctified by the purpose of the oil. So therefore, maybe those utensils had a higher level of sanctity. And because those utensils had a higher level of sanctity, if somebody were to come in contact with those utensils while you're tamei, then you would get kares. Val mikdash lo yeh chayev. But in the permanent Beis HaMikdash, you would not be liable in that same sort of a way. Ve'im nemar mikdash, and if the psukim had told me that this was the case by the permanent structure of the Beis HaMikdash, that you'd get kares, I wouldn't say kal v'chomer, then that's the case by the Mishkan, because v'lo nemar Mishkan hadn't told me that it was also the case by the Mishkan. So then Hayisi Amar would have thought, al mikdash yeh chayev, that you'd be liable in the permanent structure of the Beis HaMikdash, Shaharei Kedushas Olam, because it's a permanent structure. And therefore it makes more sense that the protection of the holiness should be stronger there. The holiness never moved around. The Mishkan, you dismantle the Mishkan and the holiness was gone. So the Mishkan lo yechayiv, therefore you might not be liable in the case of the Mishkan. Lekach nemar Mishkan, lekach nemar Mikdash. That's why we have two psukim, 7 psukim away from each other, talking about the same idea. But one uses the pasuk, use the word as Mishkan Hashem Timei, and the other one says Ki as Mikdash Hashem Timei, and so therefore you see both things.
Plus, you have the cloud of glory to protect the Mishkan as well.
Sorry, say that again.
The cloud of glory was also there to protect the Mishkan as well, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't necessarily going to protect somebody from becoming tamei, right? If somebody became tamei, right? So Rabbi Elazar, the Amora, Hachi Kakashli, this was his question. Michti, let's take a look. Mishkan, Ikri, Mikdash, and Mikdash, Ikri, Mishkan. He says, the words Mishkan and Mikdash are really sometimes interchangeable. This was his point. So, Nichtav, O-E-D, Ve'idi, Mikdash, O-E-D, Ve'idi, Mishkan. So, I'm sorry, this is Rabbi Elazar, the Amoras, the Brisa, the Rabbi Elazar, the Brisa. This is Rabbi Elazar, the Tana's problem. Rabbi Elazar's problem was, he says, look, if I had two psukim, you're right, the psukim are redundant, but if I had used the same term twice, I wouldn't need to write two psukim. If I used the same term twice, so then I could have learned the law that says that bringing tumah from outside into the Beis HaMikdash makes me liable, and also becoming tamei and staying in the Beis HaMikdash makes me liable. Why Mishkan and Mikdash lomali? Why do I need to use switching terms? Why do I need to switch from Mishkan to Mikdash? Shma mina, so therefore you see from there, tarti, it's going to be both of these rules. Number one, after all, they are interchangeable, so therefore it is repeating the same idea, but the fact that it switches from Mishkan to Mikdash and Mikdash to Mishkan tells me that I might have thought that the rule only applies in one of the circumstances and not both of the circumstances, so it tells me that also. So we're going to learn both of these laws from the fact that it's two psukim separately, both using the term Mikdash and the term Mishkan. Okay, so that's nice. Bishlama Mikdash Ikri Mishkan. So now, what you've just suggested is that the terms Mishkan and the word term Mikdash are interchangeable. If anybody's warm, I don't mind if you, right? If the term Mikdash and Mishkan are used interchangeably. So how do I see that? So Mishkan, so Bishlama Mikdash Ikri Mishkan. I understand that the Beis HaMikdash was sometimes called the Mishkan, Dichsiv, because we have a pasuk. Pasuk says in Vayikra, "V'nasati Mishkani b'sochachem." We get into Eretz Yisrael. Hashem is going to place my Mishkan in you. Well, he's going to establish a Beis HaMikdash. That's what that's talking about. But he calls it the Mishkan. El Mishkan de'ikri Mikdash minolan. But where is it that we see that the Mishkan is called the Mikdash? Maybe from the pasuk that says "V'nasu haKehasim nosei haMikdash." That it says the people of Kahas, they used to carry the Mikdash. So they didn't carry the Mikdash, they must be the Mishkan. Well, that doesn't necessarily prove anything because Hahu be'aron ksiv. That is talking about the Aron Kodesh. So
isn't the Mishkan like the Beis HaMikdash to go until we reach the whole...
That is exactly what it was, right. And so here it says that they picked it up and they moved it and they call it the Mikdash. And call it the Mishkan. But you see that Mikdash is the Aron. That's just specifically the Aron, not the whole Mishkan. So that doesn't prove it. El mehacha. Rather, we're going to learn it from over here. Ve'asu li Mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. This is in the desert. You should make for me a Mikdash, and I will dwell in you. Right? That's when Hashem is commanding us to build the Mishkan. He says, make me a Mikdash. So you see that the Beis HaMikdash is called the Mishkan, and the Mishkan is called the Mikdash. They're used interchangeably.
It's interesting. Mishkan is Gematria 410. That's the same as Kadosh. 410 is also how long the first Beis HaMikdash
stood, right?
Right.
All right.
I just thought that was
there you go.
Connection. So that's how we become Kadosh, right?
The Gematria flex. Very good.
If the first example states that it could be that they referred to the Mishkan as the Mikdash, but actually it doesn't. It's not relevant because they're actually talking about the Kodesh. Why is it mentioned at all?
Why were we say that again?
The first example is not relevant to this.
Oh yeah, why we make so the Gemara always is going to throw in ideas and then cross them off the list.
Okay.
It seems like you're right. Why bother bring the wrong answers? Sometimes when we learn a good amount from the wrong answers as much as we learn from the right answers. And I suppose this is a perfect pasuk. Before they answered what the reason why is that refers to the Aron. V'nasu hakasim nosei hamikdash was a perfect answer, right? Looked good. But you're right. It's a good point, right? You don't necessarily need to. You can just leave out the bad answer, right? But I guess the thing is that hesitant because you can answer all that. You can answer that about a lot of Gemaras. You can ask that question, right? A lot of Gemaras like, well, just leave out all the wrong answers, right? The Ran, but that's the Ran, right? In the back of the Gemara, there's the Ran, and he leaves out all the parts of the Gemara where they attempted an answers and they brought something and then they get rid of it. So it's much shorter Gemara. So it's a good point. So we must be able to see that there's a Havamina there. There's a reason that somebody thought that was going to be a good answer. I'm not sure why. Uksev. Now, the pasuk says, "Kecho asher ani mar'eh oscha es tavnis hamishkan." Right? Anything that I'm going, then so we know that this pasuk is talking about Vasuli Mikdash because the pasuk continues on and says, right, that everything that I'm going to show you, the way that the Mishkan is supposed to look. So now, what we're talking about, the Mikdash that they're building is the Mishkan. Okay, good. Now, Mishnah says that you can be liable for being tamei in the area of the Beis HaMikdash if you become tamei while you're already there. V'ishtachava o sheshaha k'dei hishtachava. Two circumstances. One, you bow down in service in the Beis HaMikdash while you're tamei. Kares. Number two, you wait in the area of the Azara of the Beis HaMikdash. The amount of time it would take for you to bow down, you're also liable. Okay, so I'm a Rava. Rava says, Lo shanu ela shishtachavet klape pnim. Aval ishtachavet klape chutz, shaha in, lo shaha lo. The concept of the hishtachava, of the bowing, only is effective as far as getting you kares if you bow in service, which would mean that you bow towards the interior of the Beis HaMikdash, right? You bow towards the Beis HaMikdash. However, if you bow facing away from the Beis HaMikdash, then that's a meaningless gesture. That's not a service gesture. And therefore, if you take the amount of time, the only way for you to be liable under that circumstance is if you do it for the amount of time it takes to bow down, because then you'd be liable for delaying the amount of time it takes to bow down, then you'd be liable. But if you do that action and it doesn't take you the amount of time to bow down, so then you're not going to be liable because neither did you bow, nor did you take the amount of time proper that it would normally take to bow. Okay, so now, and to point out that I guess that somebody, let's say, bows really fast. That's what we're saying. He just does a real quick shuckle. It's not the normal amount of time that it takes. Wouldn't count. So then it wouldn't count.
So if somebody bows the wrong way, they're still over the time.
Then it's a time issue, right? If he bows the wrong way, then it's a time issue. So if you bow the wrong way very quickly, you can avoid kares. Right? If you bow the right way very quickly, you're still liable because then you did bow.
So it's a lose-lose situation.
No so you want to be able to either avoid both of those possible things, either a proper bow, no matter how much time it takes, or staying in there the amount of time it would take to do a proper bow, even if you don't do a proper bow. Okay. Ika demasni la asefa. Some teach this rule on the end. O sheshaha bichdei hishtachava, or you're liable if you delay the amount of time it takes to bow down. Mikal dishtachava gufa boi shehia. So that seems to imply that you need the bowing itself. That where's the liability come from? It seems at the end of the Mishnah seems to imply you have to actually bow down, which means that the bowing that you actually do, this is in contrast to what we said, actually has to take the right amount of time. It's the amount of time it takes. So Amar Rava, Rava says, that's true. That's only if the bowing that you're doing is out towards the outside. But if you do bow towards the Beis HaMikdash, even if you do it very quickly, and you don't do it the amount of time it normally takes to bow, and this is how the Mishnah means to be read. If you bow down properly towards the Beis HaMikdash. Oh, or that's way number one, and it doesn't matter how much time you take. Or sheshaha kidei hishtachava, or you delay the amount of time it takes to bow. Behachi hishtachava b'klape chutz, like for example, you do a bow towards the other direction, towards the outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So then you're chayiv, then you're liable. Okay, so now, heichi dami hishtachava deis ba shehiyah, veichi dami hishtachava deleis ba shehiyah. Let's define these amounts of time. What is a bow in the right amount of time, and what is bowing in not the right amount of time? So the answer, deleis ba shehiyah zu kriya ba'alma. When you don't have the amount of time that it takes fully, that's just bending over. That's just a regular kriya. And kriya is that you bow your face towards the ground. I'm not sure if your face.
Like when you say Aleinu,
actually have to go.
In Yom Kippur, when you say Aleinu.
That's not going to be kriya, right? That's going to be.
Bowing.
Yeah, so that's going to be hishtachava, as we're going to see in a moment, right? So that's kriya. That's kriya biyama. De'is ba shehiyah. What is the right amount of time of shehiyah is pishut yadayim v'raglayim. So that's when you spread out your hands and your feet, right? You go all the way down, and you spread out you make your feet straight. I'm going to tell you, Yehuda, that you may be right, that the kriya might actually be bending on your knees and bowing all the way over. And hishtachava is bending on your knees, bending over, and then straightening out your legs. I don't think I saw that in the art scroll.
We say that
in art scroll. How does he translate there? Hishtachava and kriya, right? I remember that he had said something like that. And once you said it, I thought, that's right. So he says that...
Rashi?
Hishtachava is bowing that is more like kneeling. So he says hishtachava is kneeling. So that's when you actually get on your knees, right? That's hishtachava, and that's where that's kriya, and hishtachava is when you've got pishut yadayim v'raglayim. That involves extending the arms and legs that you've got to actually really stretch out. Okay, so that's you're right. So then kriya is like Yom Kippur. I think that's my understanding. According to art school, he doesn't say that here in this Gemara, but right now the Kahal Yereim kriya bialma. So kriya bialma. This kriya. The Kahal Yereim shehiyah. So okay, so now we want to know what is the amount of time. Okay, so we now know what you physically have to do. How much is the right amount of time that it takes to do it? So pligi bar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani v'chad di'imei. So it was an argument between Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani and somebody who was with him. Umanu, who was that second person who was with him, it was Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Ve'amri la, and some said it was Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi v'chad di'imei, that it was Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi and a guy that was with him. Umanu Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, and who was it? It was Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. Now what are they arguing about? Same two people, right? The issue is who was the main Talmid Chacham there, and who was the Chavrusa, right? The main Talmid Chacham and the guy who was learning with. So different people had different opinions as to which of the two were the greater sage. V'amri la, some said Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani chad. So v'amri la, Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani chad amar kimemrei dahai psuka v'chad amar. So one says the amount of time it takes to say this pasuk. Which we're going to say in a moment, and one says from the part of the pasuk from v'yichrou l'seifa, from the middle of the pasuk where it says v'yichrou till the end, as the pasuk is v'chol bnei Yisrael roim beredas ha'esh. All of bnei Yisrael saw when the fire came down, ukvod Hashem al habayis, and the honor of Hashem was on the Beis HaMikdash. V'yichrou apayim arza, and they bent over their faces towards the ground, al haritzpa, onto the floor. Therefore, that's why it makes sense that v'yichra'u is putting your face to the floor like Yom Kippur. V'yishtachavu, and then they bowed down. V'hodos la Hashem, and they gave thanks to Hashem. Ki tov Hashem liyolam chasdo, because Hashem is good and His kindness lasts for all eternity. So one opinion,
it's separate.
It's separate. So it's clear those two things are separate. Now the question is, how much is the proper shehiyah? So one says if you read that pasuk straight and then you read that whole pasuk out, that's the amount of time. And the other one says you start from the word v'yichra'u, which is halfway through the pasuk till the end of the pasuk. Some says from the beginning of the pasuk till V'yichro, but in the event. Okay. Tana Rabbanan. Keda alapayim. So what is Keda? Keda is bowing to your face to the ground. And that's why you're still standing on your feet. So that's sort of an acrobatic move. We see that there was a I cannot remember who it was. I should have looked it up, but there was somebody who attempted Keda to be able to show what it was like and got very injured, seriously injured in the process. Right? You can imagine somebody could pop a hamstring or an Achilles tendon somewhere and just doing this Keda. Right? It's
feet are planted on the ground.
Feet are planted in the ground. You bow face to the ground. Right? And
You bend the knees or not?
No, you don't bend the knees. So, but I'm thinking I'm not sure whether you have, I don't think it's possible for it to be where you don't lean forward in some sort of a way. I'm thinking downward dog or something, right? If you know your yoga poses, right? That's right. If that's what I'm thinking.
So then only be very flexible people.
Correct.
Yeah.
It would see that it was because people could get injured doing this. So, V'cheinu Omar, as Pasuk says, Vatika bat sheva apayim aretz, that Bathsheba bowed down to her face to the ground, right? And that's when Bathsheba was bowing down towards David, face to the ground. That's the definition of Keda. Kriya al birkayim. And Kriya, that is on your knees, right? As Yehuda asked and pointed out, and that's where the article gets from. Kriya is on the knees. V'chein Omer, as it says, Michro al birkav, from the word he was bent onto his knees, and hishtachava. And what is hishtachava? Zu pishut yadayim v'rglayim. That's when you stick your hands and feet all the way out, flat. Right?
Because we say in Yom Kippur we get on our knees, don't we?
Yes. V'nachnu korim.
Right.
And then we say mishtachavim, but we don't do more.
That's
right?
what we do.
We go as far as korim. Right? So that's it. We go as far as korim. Mishtachavim umodim, but we don't do mishtachava. We stop at korim. Okay.
There's not enough space on the wall.
That's enough. But there is but this is the interesting tie into the parsha. This week's parsha, of course, has the prohibition of kneeling on the stone floor. Is in this week's parsha. So there you go. Amar havo and as it says, how do you know where hishtachava means that? Because Omer, it's in the pasuk, havo navo ani ve'imcha v'achechel hishtachavos lecha arza. When Yaakov complains to Yosef, he says, how can it be that myself and my mother are going to bow down to you, Yosef, with our face to the ground? So that's again, hishtachava is back bowing down face to the ground. Boy Rava asks him, tzarech shehiyah lemalkus, o ein tzarech shehiyah lemalkus. So do you need to have the amount of time it takes? Let's say you do it on purpose. Now you're in the base of Mikdash and you're doing Tumah and you're Tameh, and now you do it on purpose. Do you need to be there for, you're Tameh? Do you have to wait the right amount of time in order to get Malkus? Or since you're doing it on purpose, immediately, you're doing it on purpose, you're immediately liable.
I'll say immediately.
So the Korban, so good. So we'll log you and we'll see how you do. Okay, the Korban, as far as Korban is concerned, that's just, like they had those like in the used to have when I watch baseball, right? You'd be the umpire, and then they go to commercial, they'd show you a play, and you've got to decide whether the person's safe or out, right? So this is Yehuda, he's ready to go. All right, he says, right? He says, okay, so now let's see. Le Korban Gemiri Shehiyah. So as far as Korban is concerned, that's where we learned this rule that you need to make sure you delay. Because you didn't do anything of significance if you didn't stay there for a significant amount of time. And then you are negligent in your violation because you're tameh. You find out about it later that you stayed there for a long enough period of time, then you're liable. Lamalkus lo gmiri, but it wouldn't be applicable. This rule would not be applicable to Malkus. Lo gmiri shehiyah, you don't need this rule of waiting. O dilma, or is it bifnim gmiri shehiyah, Loshna lekorban, loshna lemalkus, that when you're inside of the becoming tummy, inside of the base of Mikdash, the rule is shehiyas. You need to be there for a lengthy enough period of time in order to be liable. And if you did, then you're liable. And if not. So loshna lekorban, loshna lemalkus. It makes no difference whether you're talking about negligent and being responsible for the sacrifice or whether you did it on purpose. And the answer is teku. So unfortunately, we have to wait till Eliyahu Navi comes to find out if you're right. But we'll see how it happens. Boy Rava asks a question. Tola atzma ba'avir. Guy hangs himself in the air. I'm not sure how he does that. I'm thinking he's on a crane, right, suspended over the airspace of the Azara. He's not on the ground. So Tola atzma ba'avir Azara. He has himself hanging and suspended over the airspace of the Azara. Right? Could be he's in an airplane. Could be he flies over the area of the Azara. So Mahu, what is the halacha in that circumstance? Ki gemiri shehiyah, when we have this halacha of delay, you have to delay in order to be liable, shehiyah debas hishtachava, then we had learned why is that the amount of time? Because that's the amount of time it takes to bow down. So therefore, if you're on the ground in a circumstance where you could bow down, so then you'd be liable. Delav basi shtachava, but if you're suspended in the air, then you have no ability to bow. So then lo gmiri, then there's no delay issue there at all. It doesn't matter, right? It's not going to be a requirement. O dilma, or perhaps bifnim, when it comes to being inside the azara, so then that's the rule. Shehia gmiri lo shna de basi shtachava lo shna delav basi shtachava. That's the amount of time it is because you're inside the azara, and that's the rule, right? We are basically unsure how much to connect this amount of time back to the actual action of bowing down. Is it that the amount of time is prohibited because of the action of bowing down? So therefore, if the action of bowing down is impossible, the amount of time becomes irrelevant? Or is it that this is the rule under all circumstances? And so take away.
What's the point of mentioning if you bow down and this exact time is spent, what's the difference? Just say that the amount of time it takes to bow down.
We're illustrating that it might not be just a time issue, right? That's the question. Is it a time issue, or is it the ability to connect the amount of time that you're in there to bowing down?
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I'm just saying that the fact that it mentions both, that's why, you would think it's weird. It's like one bowing down, it almost makes sense that, it doesn't matter how long he bows down, as long as he bows down.
That was one way we said that about bowing down, but then we have a second issue, which is the amount of time. Okay, boy Ravashi. Ravashi asked a fine question. Time atzmo b'mezid mahu. So what if he makes himself tummy on purpose? So what happens there? Be'ones, if he does it negligently, it's not his fault, right? He becomes tummy. So then gemiri shehia. So then we have this tradition that the amount of time it takes to be liable. So that's going to be this amount of time it takes to wait. But if you made yourself tummy on purpose, so lo gmiri shehia, we have none of this rule of shehia. The shehia is not once you actively and intentionally engaged in tuma, odilma, or perhaps bifnim gemiri shehia lo shnava onis v'lo shnava mezid. Once we've learned this halacha about being inside, then it doesn't make any difference. So we don't have an answer to that one as well. By Ravashi asked, fine question again. Nazir bikever. Okay, so now what happens if a Nazir is in a graveyard? Okay, so now we have another circumstance where Nazir is not allowed to come in contact with the dead. He's not allowed to be in a graveyard. So, boy shehia lemalkus o enu tzarich. Does he need to be in the graveyard the amount of time that it takes to bow down? Because now the question is like this: bifnim, inside the azara, when it came to a regular Jew being tummy in the azara, gemiri shehia. So that's where the rule of the delay is taught. That's where that rule is. Bechutz, but in other circumstances outside of the area of the Beis HaMikdash, lo gemiri shehia. We don't have this rule of the delay. There's no such thing. So therefore, somebody would be liable as soon as he goes into the graveyard. O dilmer, perhaps, be'ones gemiri shehia lo shna bifnim v'lo shna bechutz. Or do we say, no, this is the rule constantly whenever somebody becomes impure, and it is in a circumstance where they're not supposed to be where they're supposed to be, this is the amount of time where you can't stand there and you would be liable. So we're not sure about that either, right? So again, I'm not sure how far to extend this law. Bolo ba'arucha. Now, next part of the Mishnah. Let's say, right, so what's the person supposed to do if he finds out that he's tamei? So he's supposed to leave immediately through the nearest exit. Okay? So what happens if he decides to go to the exit that's not the nearest exit? He goes to a further exit away. So then he's chayiv. Now he's liable. B'ktsara, if he leaves the nearest exit, the shortest exit, so then he's patur, then he's exempt. Because he became tamei, he wasn't intentional. And what does he do? He gets right out as soon as he can. Then that's good. Okay.
Does it matter about time?
Well, we're going to see. Now, this is going to be the question, right? You're ahead of me, right? So the question is it a time issue? Or is it like the bowing down, that it's just prohibited to go out the non-closest exit? And it doesn't matter how much time. What difference is it going to make? The guy takes off in a run to the exit that's not nearest.
Also, is it immediately that, and then the time starts? Or is it like...
No, it's as soon as it becomes tummy. It becomes tummy, that's right. That's because, remember, we said that you can be chayev b'shogeg, right? So that means the guy might not have known, become aware.
So is the idea of time related to his intention, whether he wants to get out as soon as possible?
It seems like and this is going to be the issue that we're going to be discussing, it seems like there's potentially two different issues. One is time, and one is the action that he's doing, right? We already saw that when it came to bowing down. One is the amount of time it takes to bow down, and one is the actual action of bowing down. If he actually bows down, even if he does so in a very fast way, he could be liable, even if he doesn't do it in the amount of time it takes. And then we have the other thing, which is where he doesn't bow down, but he stays there the amount of time it takes to bow down, then he could be liable. So we have two different
The
things.
intention is to get out as soon as possible.
Yes.
And it takes longer, whether he's slow or whether he took the wrong exit.
Yep.
His intention was to get out as soon as possible. So
Let's
do we say
we're going to see the Gemara, because the Gemara, these are exactly the questions the Gemara is dealing with. Yeah, that's a good question. So Amar Rava says, Kitsara Sha'amru, when they said that you got to go to the closest exit, Afilu Ekev Bitzad Godel, Vafilu Kol Hayom Kulo, right? Even if you walk heel to toe, that's like really slow walking, right? Normally people take bigger steps than that, right? Even if you walk heel to toe, even if it takes you all day long, and that answers the question, right? It's not a matter of time, it's a matter of going to the nearest exit, right? I was sitting with Rabbi Friedman in the airport yesterday, he's taking a look, we're trying to figure out what this Gemara means.
Rabbi Friedman?
Yes, and so he says, yeah, it's like if I tell my kid to go to bed, that walk, right? You tell your 4-year-old to go to bed, and he has that walk. He's going. You can't tell him not. He's walking. He's walking. It just takes a very long time, right? So he says that's the walk, right? I'm on my way. I'm going. So that walk, right?
The walk.
So even if it takes him all day, you're not liable, because the requirement is to get out the nearest exit, and you are. And now we're going to ask, well, wait a second. What about? He's not delaying. There's no shehiyah. He'd be liable if he stopped walking for a moment, not the moment, but the amount of time it takes to bow down, then he could be liable. But he's walking, he's literally continuously walking. Even if that walk takes him all day, he's not liable because he hasn't stopped and he's walking to the nearest exit. So he hasn't done anything.
What if he's walking to the nearest exit, stops half the time it takes to bow down, continues walking, does that again?
Great question. Boy, Rava asks, Shehios mahu shiyitztarfu. Can you combine the breaks? Right? Hey, good question, right? He walks, he takes us halfway, he walks, stops, half the amount of time it takes to bow down, then he walks a little bit more, stops again. Can you combine these together and say, he delayed the amount of time? So, Vetifshut le mididei. So he says, well, wait a second, you could see that we just said, as long as it could take him all day, so then that's fine, right? So he never stopped the amount of time it takes to walk, so to the amount of time it takes to bow down, he's okay. So the answer is no, that doesn't prove it, because Hasan bid lo shaha. That's because he never stopped. This is different. We're saying he is stopping. So does the clock, you start the stopwatch when you stop, and then you start it again, and you start it. So the answer is, yeah, we don't answer that. Sorry. This is a little this Gemara's got no answers. A lot of good questions, right? Not drawing a lot of conclusions. We're understanding where all the questions are, but the answers are, there's not a tremendous amount of answers here.
It sounds like what's up. It sounds
a lot like that idea. Well, except that that's a very specific reason, because when it comes to Hotzah, the issue is picking something up and putting something down.
Right.
Here, the issue is being somewhere you're not allowed to be, right? So it shouldn't be the same, but it does seem to work the same way, yes.
And I can walk in circles and basically take the closest exit.
No, you can't walk in circles. You've got to walk to the nearest exit. If you're walking anywhere other than to the nearest exit, you're going to get into trouble.
But how if I take the nearest exit, but I just walk around?
That doesn't sound like that works, right? You've got to go to the nearest, right? You have to go, it sounds to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like you got to go directly to the nearest. You got to take the trip out.
Otherwise, it's chayav.
Ba'mine Abaye, me Rabba. So Abaye asked Rabba the fun question. Balo ba'arucha shir kitzara. Let's say it would take you 10 seconds to get to the nearest exit, and you decide you want to go to the further exit, but you're going to run. So you're going to be out in 10 seconds, right? Same amount of time, but you go the longer route. What about that circumstance? So what will be the thing there? Shir gemiri v'chiba'u lo ba'arucha shir kitzara pater. Is it amount of time that's the issue? And at the end of the day, he hasn't been in the Azar. That's the amount of time you're given. The amount of time that it takes to normally walk from here to the closest exit. And that's the amount of time you're given. So therefore, if I take a longer way, it's fine, as long as I get out in that amount of time. O dilma dafka gemiri ba'arucha chayev b'ksar pater. Or is that just the Mishnah says, this is where you got to go, right? The point is, you got to go to the nearest exit. Going to the further exit, that is like an action. Like we said, bowing is an action. So going to the further exit isn't itself problematic, And so therefore, if you went out the longer exit, even if you got out faster, right? Let's say there's a lot of people by the exit that you're trying to get to, that's the closest exit. You can't get out as fast. You got to walk slower. And it would be faster if you go out the longer way. No, you got to go out the closer one anyway, because the closer one is what you got to do. You go to the further one, you be chayav.
Jump out the window.
So there's no windows there. Amar le. So he said to him, Lo nitna arucha lahadchos eitzel etzlo. He says that the distant one is not there for him to push himself to get there in a faster way. Right, even if he's running, that's not going to be okay. Can't do that. So maskif la Reb Zera. So Reb Zera says Ella de kaimalon. So what comes up first is Tame sheshimish be misa hechi mishkachasla. He says, okay. So now we have a problem. Okay, if what you just said is true, I can never go. It's not a matter of time. You just explained to me it's not a matter of time. I can't go even if I get out as fast at the same amount of fastness. Right, it's still going to be a problem. We have a rule that somebody who is tamei, who serves and does a service in the Beis HaMikdash, he gets misa b'dei shemayim, right? It's a heavenly punishment. Now, how can that punishment ever be given to anybody? There's no circumstance where anybody could get that punishment. Because, idelo shaha, right? So, heichi avid avoda. Because let's say he's walking, he's got to leave. He's got to stop at some point and do a service. So he's tamei, and he stops to do the service. Now he's chayav misa. Problem is that if he stops and does a service, he's going to be there for 8 seconds or so, which makes him chayav kares for being in the Beis HaMikdash while he's tamei. Kares is more severe than misa. Therefore, he's chayav kares, not misa. So how do we ever wind up with a circumstance where a person is ever going to be liable for being tamei and doing a service in the Beis HaMikdash? What's the point of that law? There's no circumstance where it's applicable. So we have to come up with a circumstance where it's applicable. So if he didn't wait at all, he was just walking straight out, so then how do you do the service? If he does stop, to bar karesu, then he's supposed to get kares. So now, if you had told me that getting to the exit was a matter of a time issue, right? So basically, I become tamei, I take a look, it's an 8-second walk to the door, I've got 8 seconds to get out of here. Okay, so then you can go to the further door. Like, that's what I was hoping you'd say. But you didn't say that. You told me I got to go to the nearest door. So if you had told me it was a matter of time, I could have understood this. Because, mishkachas law, de'onis nafshei biktsara, ve'avad avoda. Here's what he does is, he does a service and then runs after the service to get out. So what happens is he's basically 15 seconds from the doorway, right? And then he says, you know what, I'll stay here for 5 seconds and do it in avoda. He stays for 5 seconds, does a service, and then runs as fast as he can. He gets out in 4 more seconds after that. So then, great, he got out in time. He's not chayav kares for being in the Beis HaMikdash for too long, because he got out in the time, but he's chayav misa because he did the service. Okay, so that would be a good answer. If it's a function of time, so that's a good answer. But, Ella, Iyamart Yudzayin Amavez, Iyamart Davka Gemiri, if you're telling me, no, you've got to definitely get out that door the quickest way, so hechi mishkachas law. So there's no circumstance, right? It's not a matter of time, because any time, basically, any amount of time that you stop, if you're walking towards the exit, you're not chayav. As soon as you stop, then you can be chayav. So now this guy, as soon as he stops, even if he gets out, even if he runs afterwards and gets out fast, the fact that he stopped and paused and did a service is going to make him liable. Any circumstance that it is, because you can't make up, the bottom line is, you can't make up the time. You can't run and make up the time. That's what we just learned. So, Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, my kusha. What do you mean? I got an easy explanation for you. Mishkachas law, I'll give you a circumstance. We only need one, by the way, so even if it's far-fetched, we have, as long as there's one circumstance where you could be liable for this punishment, then that's the reason why the law exists. Kagon Shababik Tzara. The guy he's standing, imagine the guy, Kohen, he's standing on the Mizbeach, and he's up there, and he becomes tamei. Okay? So then, he's got to go out the quickest way possible. So he starts to head towards the ramp, to walk down the ramp, to get out the nearest door. The hafach betzinura, and as he's walking by, he's holding a pitchfork in his hand, and he takes the meat, and he flips it over in the fire to help it burn faster.
Well, that's doing the avodah.
Yes, but it does take any time for him to stop, right? So therefore, since he's he's chayav misa, not chayav kares, right? He's going with the pitchfork and he flips it over on his way past. It's a hockey move, right? So it feels like it's a hockey move, right?
But doesn't he say, the Gemara doesn't say that once you do that, once he does that, the avoda, whatever, he stops to do something and he's chayav mita. The exiting is nonsense anymore, doesn't it?
Well, because if
not
the exiting isn't
being
nonsense,
used anymore.
because the exiting might make him chayav kares, which is a bigger punishment.
Once he does the avoda,
Yes.
chayav mita,
Now he's chayav misa, right?
then the exit.
Then he takes too long to get out. Now he's chayav kares.
No, but the exiting is nonsense.
Why?
Because he's already.
Hashem's not going to kill him on the way out. He's not. It's misa b'dei shemayim, not misa b'yadav, right? Misa. I think I should have made that clear. That's right. Misa b'dei shemayim. Hashem's going to kill him. So therefore, now Hashem is going to give him kares instead of misa b'dei shemayim, and that's worse. Kares is worse than misa b'dei shemayim, right? Sorry if I didn't make that clear.
While he's throwing the meat in the fire.
Sorry, he's got to know what he's doing, right?
No, but
It's not
he's
chayav
throwing
misa
the
if he doesn't
fire.
know.
Like, wait a minute, I'm chayav. I'm tummy. He throws in the meat.
Yeah, he knows he's tamei. He's walking out the door. He flips the meat over on his way out, gets misa b'dei shemayim, and goes right to the nearest exit, and he doesn't get kares. That's how it works. Ukta Rav Huna. And this is going to follow Rav Huna's statement that Rav Huna says, Dam Rav Huna, Zar shehafach betzinura. If you're a non-Kohen, and you take your pitchfork and you flip the meat over in the fire, chayav misa, that is a service of the Beis HaMikdash, and you are liable for death penalty for doing it, right? A non-Kohen who does that service. Therefore, if this is a fellow who is tamei and he does that service, then it is a service, and he's chayav misa for it. Good. Okay, we've come to the case. Gufa, let's go talk about this case of burning this meat for a moment, just to talk about it for a second. Amar Rav Huna says, Zar shehafach v'tzimnura. Okay, we've got this non-Kohen who gets into the Beis HaMikdash somehow, and he decides he really wants to help, and so he goes up there with his fork, and he helps the meat burn on the Mizbeach. Chayav Misa. You are liable to death b'dei shemayim, Misa b'dei shemayim, because a non-Kohen can't do any service. Okay, that's good. Heichi dami. Now, what is the circumstance under which this avera could occur? Idelo hafach lo miachli. So if the meat, let's say, is outside the fire, and if he doesn't flip it back into the fire, then the meat is not going to get consumed by the fire. So then pshita, I mean, that's obvious that's a service. Why do we have to figure out that's called a service? Of course that's a service. The meat needs to be burned, and it wasn't being burned, so now you burned it, so therefore it's a service. Now, what are you going to think? It's a circumstance that the meat was in the fire, and it was being consumed. So what does he do? He sticks his pitchfork in and he pokes it a little bit back into the fire. So, my kovid, then what do you really do? It was going to burn, and now it burns. So why is that a problem? So the answer is lo tzricha. No, I need it because de'i lo hafach bu miachli betartishay. If he hadn't pushed it into the fire, more into the fire, it would have taken 2 hours for the meat to get burnt up. The hashda now miachli bechadshot. It's going to get consumed in 1 hour. So he helps it along.
But he should be chav because he's still tummy.
So now we're not talking about tummy case.
He's not causing it. He's not causing it.
He's causing it.
The meat's going to be.
So that's the point. V'hakamash malon. This is what it means and this is what it now teaches us. Dechol krove avoda avodahi. You don't have to cause the meat to be burned, as long as you assist in the process to occur faster. That is service. That is the avoda. That's exactly right. That's exactly your point. Now this is right. Yehuda, this is talking about a non-Kohen doing the service. This isn't talking about somebody's tummy doing the service. We're talking about the tummy person before. Now we just mentioned on the passing that a service that could be done very quickly is this, and so we decided we'll take a few lines just to explain the nature of this service of putting meat into the fire of the Mizbeach. Amar Rabbi Shaya says, Ba'ina de'ema milsa us mistafina mechavraya. So he says, I want to say something, but I'm very scared of what my friends are going to think if I say this out loud. Right? I'm a little nervous to say what I'm about to say, because it sounds outrageous what I'm about to say. Okay,
we're not here to judge.
Thank you. It's one heck of a hook, right? It's one heck of a hook, right? I'd love to say, my friends, everybody, and they wrote it down in the Gemara. So hanichnas lebeis hamenuga. Okay, somebody is walking. There's a house that has tzaras. Okay, we know that anything that's in the house that has tzaras is tamei. Anybody who goes into the house that has tzaras becomes tamei. Okay, so here's what happens. He goes derech achorov. This guy walks backwards into the house. Vafilu kulo chutz mechotmo if his entire body, normally we say rubo kikulo, once most of him is someplace, then we consider that where he is entirely. Even if his nose is sticking out, I guess the Jews have whatever. I know. His nose is sticking out. Tahor. He is still tahor. Doesn't count. Why? Dichsiv. Because look at what the pasuk says. How do you read that word? V'haba. V'haba el habayis derech. So it says the one who comes into the house. You're tamei if you come into the house. So derech bia asra Torah. He says that means that if you walk into the house, you're tamei. If you go backwards, that's not coming in the normal way. So if you do something like we have over on Shabbos, right, with if you do it with a shinoi, right, come in the non-normal way, then it doesn't count. So that's what's going on. The guy's walking backwards, doesn't count. Umistafina mechavraya. So he says, and I'm scared, but my friends are gonna make fun because that sounds so strange that somebody's entire body is inside this house, his nose is sticking out. He's not tamei. So ihachi. So if what you're saying is, well, they said to him, well, wait a second, if that's true, kulonami, why does it have to be your nose is sticking out? If you're telling me that he has to come into the house to be liable, so then if he's in the house, but he didn't come into the house, then he shouldn't be tamei, even if his nose is in the house. So Rava says, no, that I won't say, because kulo lo gora mikalim. If he's entirely in the house, then he's like any other utensil. Anything that's in the house completely for sure is contaminated, right? So he's lo gora mikalim shebabayis. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, lo yitama the kol asher babayis, right? He will not, right, that the Kohen should remove everything from the house before he declares it tamei, so that it will not impurify it, because anything that's in the house, when he declares it to be tamei, is going to be impure. Okay? So now, therefore, for sure, if he's totally in the house, he's tamei. He's mostly in the house, but part of him is sticking out. If he went in backwards, he's not tamei. If he goes in forwards, he is. Tanya nami hachi. You have a brisa that says this as well. Gogin halalu, right? The rooftops of the Beis Hamikdash, areas where the roof extended over the area of the Azara, but you're on the rooftop, you're not in the Azara. Ein ochlin sham koche kochim. You cannot eat koche kochim up on those rooftops. Not considered part of the Azara. Vein shochtin sham kochim kalim. And you're not allowed to slaughter in those places the light sacrifices, which you're normally able to slaughter anywhere in the Azara. V'tamei shenichnas derech gagin lehechal. And if somebody is tamei who comes in through the roof, right? Let's say he parachutes down from the rooftops, or let's say he takes a ladder, he climbs up to the thing and hops off the roof into the Azara. He's potter. Why is he potter? Shenamar, because the pasuk says, "Ve'hamikdash lo savo." You should not come into the Beis Hamikdash while you're tamei. Derech bias Torah. Coming in while you're tamei, that's prohibited. This is not a normal way of coming in. So therefore, you see that Rava he didn't want to say it, but not so far fetched. Sounds like it actually is. It is correct. Okay. So then. We'll start this issue, but then we'll finish it up tomorrow. Zuhi mitzvahs aseh shebamigdash she'in chayav aleha. So we had a strange end part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says this is a circumstance where we have a positive commandment, where if a basin told you that something was permissible, right, then it would not be they would not be wrong, and they would not have to bring a sacrifice as teaching the wrong halacha. And that is referring to the circumstance.
What's it again?
He says, mitzvah sashay. So he said that this is, let's go back to that Mishnah. The Mishnah is on, where's the Mishnah? Right, Mishnah, Manela, the Chayv, he says, Rabbi Elazar Omer, Hasheretz, Zuhi mitzvah, aseh benito is the next one. It's on Yud Dalet Amud Beis. So he says this mitzvah of the nitma ba'azor. Let's say, right? If somebody, the fact is that this fellow has to get out of he's a mitzvah aseh shemikdash. So he is, he's supposed to be able to get out of the azara. If he becomes tummy in the azara, so if he comes out the fast way, if they say that is permissible, that is not a mistake, right? That's what he said. That if somebody doesn't know about his tumah and he goes out the fastest way, so then it's not asur. So he said that's normal. Now, the Mishnah then says something very weird, right? The Mishnah then says, and this is a circumstance by Nida would not be the case, right? So we had explained the case that when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, when you find out that you're Tameh, remember this, you have to remember this, Brian, when you're in the Beis HaMikdash and you're Tameh, the halacha is get out as fast as you can, okay? Then all of a sudden they say, yeah, but by the way, that's not the same thing as Nida, right? If you are having relations with your wife and she says, I'm a Nida, don't get out as fast as you can because exiting is Bia. And so therefore that would make you liable. Rather, what do you have to do? You have to wait until your Aver is not hard anymore, and then you exit. Because if you just pull out that way right there, that is Bia. So therefore they draw the distinction that in the Azara, go out as fast as you can. In Nida, don't go out as fast as you can. That's this decision. Which is strange. If Brian's face explains the Gemara perfectly. It's exactly what Gemara wants to know. 1 second, you're talking about Tuma Beis HaMikdash, and then you flip over to Nida here. What is going on? What is this connection that seems like an awfully strange place to jump to? Yeah. So the answer to the question the Gemara wants to know is, Heicha kai dekamar zui. So he says, when your Mishnah says, and this is the circumstance which is different than the ruling of Nida. Well, that's very nice, but were we looking for one? Was that like something that we saw anyplace else? The answer is, Hasam kai. We're talking about a connection to a Mishnah in Horios, even though it's not necessarily an order, because Horios is coming next, right? It's coming up in a couple of Masechtas. But there's a Mishnah over there which says, Ein chayavin al aseh v'al los aseh shebemigdash. There's a positive commandment and a negative commandment that a beis din would not be liable for teaching falsely. Ve'ein mevi'in asham talui al aseh v'al los aseh shebemigdash, and you don't bring this korban asham talui if you're not sure whether you did or you didn't do it in the Beis HaMikdash. Aval chayavin al aseh v'al los aseh shebenida, but you would be liable for that same circumstance in a case of nida. And you're going to bring an asham talui on the positive and the negative case, shebenida. The ka'amar, and now we're saying zui mitzvah aseh. This is it. You want to know what that case? What are you talking about? This is the case. Being in there while you're tameh and needing to get out really fast, that's the circumstance we've been talking about. That's where you've got to get out as fast as you can if they tell you get out as fast as you can by the mikdash, that's the right answer. Tell you that by Nida, that'll be the wrong answer. Mikdash, she'ein chayav in halal, ve'ezazu mitzvahs asher shebenida, shechayav in halal, hayam mishamish ima tahora. If you are having relations with a tahora, the amra lo nitmesi, and she says, I am tameh, upirsh miyad, and you leave immediately, just like we were told here by the mikdash, chayav, then you'd be liable. Why? Shemipnei, sheyitziaso, hana lo kabiaso, because that's considered bia. We'll stop here. We'll continue to pick up on this issue of this Nida correlation next time.